So this is the final stage of the monitoring process. We know that the CSOs are expected to involve in data gathering around two specific areas. One is the enabling environment assessment, and we also noted that CSOs are expected to be involved when it comes to the Kampala principles. So, given this kind of limited space for CSOs to be involved in data collection, data gathering, profitable participation in this last stage is extremely important. I was noting down, according to previous reflections, is that this is even more important because we have some concerns about governments cooking data, manipulating data. So we have the opportunity in the reflection stage to understand what governments have submitted. Obviously, submissions are public, so at some point, in a way or another, CSOs will have the chance to review the official submissions. Let's never forget this. At some point, government's submissions will be up online. So I know that this is not what we expect to happen, but nevertheless, that data at some point will be available. Actually, for those of you involved in DAC work, let's recall that through the CRS, it's actually possible to have a very granular picture of the projects that donors are implementing in countries. So this is to say that if we are patient enough, we can dig out all or a significant amount of information about what donors are doing. So let's not play down the importance of this reflection stage. I think we have already noted that there are some major outputs from the monitoring process. The country briefs, and which is actually the output, bringing together the data from a given country, the data that governments are supposed to submit. So once the country briefs are available, governments are expected to start consultations. Noting a couple of points. The country briefs will be made public, will be disclosed after a back and forth between national governments and the joint support team. You may recall from one of those previous, let me see if I can pull this up again. Well, it's point 3, validation, okay? And the data validation is the step where governments and joint support team are expected to speak to one another, and so that's the official space for GPDC to question some of the figures, some of the findings coming from countries. But as we noted, this is mostly an official business, business between governments and joint supporting team. In previous conversations, we highlighted the risk that this exercise can turn into a government business only, which would be contrary to the GPDC spirit and nature, because the GPDC is a multi-stakeholder platform. And I think we could highlight here that there is a contradiction between the GPDC that is formally a multi-stakeholder platform and one of the major features of GPDC that is fundamentally government-led. So there is a tension between the nature of the GPDC and the nature of one of the major outcome processes of the GPTC itself. So we have the country briefs, and they are supposed to be discussed in official forums at national level. These forums over the years have been called in a variety of ways. Even before Geneva, these forums have been called action dialogues. I think we briefly mentioned yesterday that CSOs were really pushing that direction, because let's recall that one of the fundamental CSOs' position was about the fact that sometimes we have data, and what we lack is that data is translated into action. The data are being discussed in countries. And so over time, the policy to hold action dialogues has been developed, and that has been officially endorsed in Geneva as one of the fundamental blocks that belong to the monitoring process. And let's be very clear here, we are not collecting information for the sake of that, as we said many times over, but we are collecting information in a way that we can generate change. Data to inform change, data to generate change. And this is actually the space where this change, this behavior change, can be subject to a multi-stakeholder reflection and possibly subject to a shared process leading to plans, leading to action points. From this slide you see the fundamentals. I think it's extremely interesting once again that we consider this kind of the disclaimer, because by noting that there is not one-size-fits-all approach, well, I might argue that the GPTC is kind of stating that, once again, governments are in the lead. I think as CSOs, we are, again, in a difficult position because we appreciate that these processes should be aligned with the country reality. So we really appreciate that there is no one-size-fits-all situation. But we are also aware that this kind of approach might give governments much to space to do what they want. So here again, it's going to be fundamental to have a good CSO network in place at the national level, but also at the global level, in a way that the CSO global community is able to get a sense of what is happening across countries. We can interact with the joint support team, the GPTC co-chairs. We can warn them about things that are not working, or we can praise best practices. A few bullet points that summarize what we can expect to happen. Very basic points. Again, the government national focal point is supposed to lead, is supposed to bring together, to draft plans, all the usual steps you can assume that a conversation at national level might require. As we noted, the reflection stage is based on country briefs, and there are even some guiding questions, and the questions are really pointing to best practices, bottlenecks, and possible action points. Here, it's just a menu of options. You can have other options. You can have other areas to be raised in this action dialogues, other driving questions. Hear more about the nature of these action dialogues. I would draw your attention to the bottom bullet point, which includes this reference to the ownership of the results and the follow action points. And this is one of the core achievements that we can expect to get through this monitoring process. And I think this ties well with the other reflection that we shared previously, that the monitoring process is a technical and labor is a technical effort, but at the same time it is really a politically laden process, and this is a very clear example because from the data we are expected to come to action points that can influence our government's work and the relationship between governments and stakeholders and governments and development partners. I guess that it's fair enough to understand where the donors are in this process, because it seems that everything is about the national governments and CSOs, which is great, but I would argue that donors should be clearly positioned in this process, and not just because they must be part of the action dialogues, but because they should be affected by the action points. We are expecting the action points to be generating behavior change that can change also donors' policies. Let's not forget that one of the other findings or one of the other outputs from this new monitoring framework is actually donors' profiles. To me, it's not entirely clear when these donor profiles will be available. I can assume they'll be available in the fourth year after there is a more comprehensive set of data coming from the different national reporting exercises. But let's not forget that at last we're going to have reviews of how donors are performing, how donors are behaving. This is going to be another interesting finding, element, outputs that we are expected, or we can expect ourselves to take advantage of. And this is different from the current situation. Here again, this focus on translating results into concrete actions, frameworks at country level. Let's see whether or not, for instance, from official picture, there is something referring to donors. Why I'm insisting on this? Because sometimes these general frameworks mostly point to reforms in countries, mostly refers to how the local government or the local governments should behave. For instance, let's consider generate outcome documents intended to promote policy, system, and behavioral change. Okay, who's changed? Who has to change? Who has to adjust their system, their policies? And there's just a very, I would say, thin references to donors in this bullet point. Plan commitments to guide how stakeholders can partner better together. This is very, very mild references to the other players beyond national governments. Okay, this is more about the practicalities about organizing the action dialogues. This is something you can go back when you are starting this process here in country. So from my reflection, you may have possibly seen that I am absolutely convinced that this reflection stage is one of the big opportunities that we have. At the same time, we know that if in countries we do not have a conducive environment, even this reflection stage can be actually just a public relation exercise. So that's the big problem that we have to deal with. In addition, with the other kind of issue I was trying to highlight, what's the role of donors? What's the role of the private sector? Are we or is there an expectation that these behavior change action points relate just to governments and the other players are not part of this exercise. I guess that in 2024 we can expect some of these action dialogues to take place, specifically for those countries who started the monitoring process in 2023. So I think in 2024 we're going to have this opportunity to understand whether or not their expectations and the promises will come true. Thank you.
We were going to present just something about, there's not a slide for it, just to suggest that there is a initiative called the Thematic Initiative on CSO Enabling Environment, which is a multi-stakeholder initiative. I'm just putting these slides up to show what the global dashboard looks like. This initiative is more or less championed by the CPD, but we also have interested parties in the Swedish government and WINGS, which is the network of philanthropic foundations, other CSOs that are not part of CPD, and some other, let's say, the secondary tier, other governments, both in provider and recipient countries. The purpose of that initiative is essentially it's to stimulate these action dialogues. The initiative, ideally, I mean, in a perfect world, would secure some resources to support actual engagement by CSOs at the national level. But the resourcing picture, obviously, or the terrain these days at the global level, as is obvious or as evident, is not very robust. So what is currently being considered is basically a small resourcing package that supports some, let's say, regional dialogues eventually, and some action dialogues at country level and in sort of select countries, I suppose. And the purpose is to use the results of the enabling environment assessment and to build multi-stakeholder dialogue around those results. Again, like I said, it's still in its sort of infancy, or let's say adolescence at least. I think conceptually it's pretty well defined in what it wants to accomplish, but now it's at the stage of sort of needing commitment from one or two providers to see it through. So that's just to say this is one of the concrete actions that the CPD is pushing for at the global partnership level, and eventually it may be the case. I think we'll decide. Seems like Nepal might be one of the places where they conduct one of the action dialogues based on its prominence and everything else that we've seen so far. But so it's just an update on that, on this initiative. And so the membership, I mean, we're there through CPD, but I think it's open. It will be open. If you're interested to join it, we can set up, well, we'll see what happens in a few months, but have kind of a small coordination group that will aim to engage in this, or a small reference group, I could say. We had these other sets of slides for the engagement to inform a little bit, shifting a little bit of focus back to the next session, which is how to plan for engagement regarding the country results. We had a few slides that basically give the snapshot of the phases that we're looking at in terms of a little more detail on that first slide that shows, or the slide that shows the roadmap of the different 5 stages. So in our next discussion, it will be good to have this in the back, well, not even the back, at the front of your minds in terms of how we workshop the engagement strategy, understanding the different phases of the rollout at like the official level. And like I said, this one just gives a little bit more detail and nuance to the different stages of the monitoring process. So we'll leave this one up.